Hello, everyone, and welcome to this lecture on 12 steps to writing an essay. You may be asking, why do you need an English class, or why do you need a class that requires writing of any sort? Well, it comes down to this. As any non-native speaker will tell you, English is hard. It's not the hardest language to learn, but it definitely is up there. Here's why. We have spellings that make no sense. For example, why aren't the words through, though, and enough pronounced the same way? If this were a language like Spanish, for instance, those three words would be pronounced exactly the same way because Spanish pronounces words the way they are spelled. We don't. In fact, we tend to have words in our language that are borrow-overs from back when we spoke Old English and also from Middle English when we were borrowing from French and just about every other language out there. So instead of through, thou, and anew, or throw, though, and eno, or thruff, thuff, and enough, we have three different pronunciations for a word that essentially has the same suffix, and it makes no sense. Nor does it make sense that we have a K in the word knife, because we don't pronounce the K in the word knife. We used to, believe it or not, we used to say knife, and we used to say, instead of night, we would say knight to differentiate between the two, but now the words night and night can either mean anytime after the sun goes down or somebody who tends to run around in armor. Pronunciations can also change the very meaning of a word. For example, what's the difference between patronizing and patronizing? Depending on where you come from, if you patronize a business, you're making fun of it, but if you patronize it, you're spending money there. And depending on which region of the country you're in, that may actually be the opposite, which is insane. And some different words are spelled exactly the same, such as two, and two. There is no difference in the pronunciation between those three words. Also, there, and there. Those three words at least have a reason for being that way because they're all a form of something similar to the same pronoun, but they do have different meanings and they're used in different ways. That's part of the reason why even English speakers have trouble with this sort of thing. And why do you need a writing process? The reason why you need a writing process is because writing is so important that you can do nothing else without it. Even these days, when we don't actually write letters by hand anymore or type essays on a typewriter, we're still typing away at our computers, we're still texting each other regularly, and we do so through writing, because writing allows information to be transmitted to anyone in a form that can be reviewed rather quickly and easily and as often as needed. For instance, if I were to do this video for you, you would think, well, shouldn't you just put on some sort of closed captioning so I know what's going on and I know what you're saying? And that's fine, but what if I were and what did I just say? There's no way for you to know. And certainly, if you're watching this through YouTube, the YouTube closed captioning is not going to be able to reproduce what I just said, but writing can. Writing can reproduce speech when done correctly, even if it is Tasmanian devil speak like I just did. And good writing includes learning the rules of writing because all three of these things are very important. Now, the first step in a writing process, if you don't already have one, and by the way, this lecture is for those of you who, when you are given an assignment, get stuck with just starting and knowing where to go. The first step is to define your purpose in doing the assignment. And sometimes that is defined by the assignment itself. You are asked, for instance, to do some sort of comparative analysis between life as it is in real life and presented in the book 1984. Sometimes that purpose is going to be defined by a prompt. For example, if you were given a diagnostic for this class, you got a prompt. and that prompt told you exactly what was expected of you for that particular assignment. That's going to be the case for all of your papers this coming semester. So you need to answer the question, why am I writing this paper? Am I arguing a fact? Am I making an evaluation? Am I stipulating a definition? Or am I making a proposal? Or am I doing a comparison? That's going to help you narrow the range of topics down if you have a free choice of topics. Step 2 is to choose your topic. Sometimes that's defined by the assignment too, such as the type of argument you have to do, whether it's convincing or persuasive, or whether it's literary analysis. You may not always have that choice, but sometimes you do have a choice. And if you do have that choice, if you are able to choose the topic for your paper, you should always choose something that interests you. For instance, not something that bores you, not something that's going to bore you over the course of a month, for instance, because that's usually how long it's going to take from the time you get the assignment sheet for a paper to the time you turn it in. Choose something that interests you, something that won't bore you, because if you're bored writing a paper, I'm going to be bored reading your paper, and you don't want me to be bored reading your paper. For that matter, you don't want anyone else to be bored either, do you? And why would you pay so much money to take this class just to be bored by it? So answer the question, what would I want to write about in this particular assignment? The third step is to gather preliminary information. Sometimes that's as easy as reading an essay or an article that's been assigned in class, or doing the assigned reading out of a book, engaging in discussion with your classmates, either in person or online. You can do some of those tricks that you may have learned in English 101, such as free writing, journaling, brainstorming, diagramming, clustering, interviewing. Or you could even do research. Oh no, not research. Not long hours spent in the library among the dusty books where people are talking on their cell phones and making out behind the stacks and doing all these things they should be doing in the library, and all around you are these dusty, dusty books that are sure to have brown recluse spiders up inside of them that could kill you. Or it could be long minutes spent in front of a computer, doing a search, getting 10,000 hits on it, 9,990 of which are probably ads. Neither of those is really research, and research is not required at step 3. All you should be doing at this step is simply reading up on the topic to become knowledgeable of all sides. The reason it's necessary to be knowledgeable on all sides of a particular issue is because if you're setting out to write an argument, you need to be aware of what the two sides are so you can better present your own side in a particular argument. Step 4 is to define your research question. Now, there's that R word again. Having a research question may not actually involve research, despite that word. The research question is simply, what question am I trying to answer with this paper? Am I, for instance, trying to argue that something did or did not happen? If that's the case, then you're doing an argument of fact. If you're trying to define the nature of something, then you are doing an argument of definition. If you're trying to define whether or not something is good or bad, or if you're reviewing something, then that's going to be an argument of evaluation. And if you're proposing that something should be done about some issue that you care strongly about, then that would be a proposal argument. And those types of questions, by the way, are called stasis questions, and they help to narrow down the research question and the type of argument that you're setting out to do. At some point in the semester, you may be asked to do a purely convincing paper or a purely persuasive paper. And if that's the case, you're going to need to know which of these questions lead to a convincing essay and which ones lead to a persuasive one. And we will go into the details about the distinctions between those quite soon. Step 5 is to answer the question, being the research question, that is. And now that you've done preliminary reading, all you have to do is just go back through the material you've already looked at, possibly doing a little bit more, but mainly going with the material you already have, this time with a more focused eye because you know what you're looking for. You should also get a sense by this point what your stance is on the particular issue, because you have read both sides and you may have an idea of which side you agree most with. And if that's the case, you also need to look for information that proves your points which is your side, and refutes those of the opposition, those who don't agree with you, because those are the ones you'll be arguing towards. And we'll talk about that more in a second. Step 6 is to create your thesis or your main idea. Because now that you've decided what your stance on a particular issue is, you should be able to do a thesis statement, which states what that stance actually is. And it should be a direct answer to your research question. Should we or should we not do this? Yes, we should. No, we shouldn't. Something like that. A thesis is an arguable statement with which someone can or may disagree. And if you're listening to this on headphones, you may want to turn your volume down just a little bit. It should be the sort of statement to which somebody could say, "Oh, no, it isn't." Or which they can say, "Oh, yes, it is." "Oh, no, they can't." "Oh, yes, they can." It's something like that, because whoever is going to disagree with you should be able to respond that way. If they can't, you don't have a thesis, and you need to make sure that you do have a strong thesis for any given argumentative paper. To that end, a thesis is not a statement of fact. If you were to say in an essay, "The sky is blue," someone may say, "Oh, yes, actually it is, you're right." And sometimes it isn't, but that's not an argument, you see. It's just a statement of fact. It is also not an announcement statement. And by the way, do not do announcement statements in any of your papers this semester. If you do, I will tell you you have done so, and I will make fun of you. No, I won't, obviously, but I will tell you if you've done it, because you haven't done a thesis if you have. If you were to say, "In this paper, I will argue that da-da-da-da-da-da-da," that's not a thesis. That's simply a statement of intent. It is a statement that you are going to argue something, but it doesn't necessarily say what it is that you are arguing. It has to state your stance. If you were to say, "In this paper, I will argue that the grocery bag tax should be eliminated for the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic," that only tells us you're going to argue that. But if you were to say, "The grocery bag tax should be eliminated for the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic," someone's going to say, "Oh, no, it shouldn't." You've immediately turned it into a thesis statement with just a few words. A thesis statement is also not what I like to call an NR statement, which stands for "No, really?" It's a statement of blinding obviousness, the sort of thing that nothing needs to be said about. Your audience doesn't need to know the statement. If you were to say, "There are many differences and similarities between high school and college," then your reader is probably going to say, "No, really? I had no idea. The scales have fallen from my eyes. You have illuminated my life. I laughed, I cried, your paper became a part of me." No, that's not going to happen. Instead, if you were to say something like, "High school is more difficult than college." "Oh, no, it isn't." Sorry, I forgot to warn you about that. Yeah, that would make it a thesis statement. That would be something that is indeed arguable. Once you have figured this out, once you have decided what your stance is, you will better understand who it is that you are trying to convince or persuade of that stance. Because you have to figure out who you're writing for. You've got to answer that question. These are your intended readers. These are the people who disagree with you, but are willing to be convinced or persuaded because they are reasonable people. In other words, they're not people on Twitter. You need to figure out what they need to know and what they already know, because that's going to help you shape the paper. You also have to figure out who is represented in the paper by your argument. These are the invoked readers. These are the people whose lives may change if your argument becomes a reality. So, for example, for that argument that I just mooted about grocery bag taxes, it would be people who have to pay those taxes. In short, everybody, but specifically people who can't always afford to. They would be the invoked readers. And then we come to the real readers who may be reading your paper without any actual investment in the argument. They have no skin in the game, as they say in sports. They're not going to be affected one way or the other, or they don't have a strong stance one way or the other, and so your paper is going to be more informational to them. You've got to decide who you're trying to inform, convince, or persuade, and by the way, that's never going to be me, or at least not me and me alone, because I will be grading your writing. I will not be grading your stance on a given issue. I will instead be grading whether or not you have argued that stance well. Now, if personally I happen to agree with you, I can make the evaluation that somebody on our side may not actually make such an argument, or that the other side will not be persuaded by it. Or, if I disagree with you, I could say, all right, if I were someone who disagreed with this, I might not be persuaded by this. You'd need a stronger argument here. But I'm not going to grade you based on your stance. So you should never be able to, at the end of the semester, to say, Mr. Witt gave me a D because he doesn't like my political affiliations. No, Mr. Witt gave you a D because you can't punctuate your way out of a wet paper bag. Because that's what I grade on. That and your ability to argue. Step 8 in the process is to organize and outline your paper. And by the way, outlining is not punishment. Outlining is simply coming up with some sort of non-fancy ordering of how the paper is going to work. You just state your thesis, your reasons, and your proof. You say, I feel that the grocery bag tax should be eliminated. You would say, here are my reasons. This is one. This is one. This is one. And then for each of those reasons, give some form of proof. And that's all you have to jot down in an outline. It doesn't even have to be in sentence format. And by the way, I am not going to require you to ever turn in an outline, but I do recommend that you do them. You always need to have an intro and conclusion. And that should probably be the end of the organization process, though it's probably a good idea to figure out how you're going to start your paper. Your paper should always have a thesis in the intro, by the way. But it should also have a hook, something that gets the reader's attention. And the conclusion, instead of simply stating word for word what the thesis and the reasons were, it should instead answer the questions, so what? Who cares? In other words, why should anyone care about the thing that you've just been arguing about? And what does it change? What does it matter anyway? Because that's actually going to be somewhat new information, but it's going to be more general. And it means that your conclusion will read differently than your intro will. And finally, never simply start writing. Because if you do, I can guarantee that for many of you, the first 3 words that come out of your fingertips when you're typing your paper will be, in today's society, or ever since the beginning of time. Yeah. Be very careful of that sort of thing. Usually a phrase like, in today's society and since the beginning of time, means that the student doesn't know how to start their paper, and they're trying to think their way into their intro because they don't have a plan for it. So you end up with ridiculous sentences like, since the beginning of time, people have been complaining about violence on television. No, they haven't. Step 9 is to follow that outline or that plan that you have written up and then draft your paper. Get it down on paper, following that plan as much as you can, as closely as you can. And don't worry about the mistakes just yet. In fact, there is an essay that we used to teach at Loyola, when I still taught there, called Shitty First Drafts, and I apologize for the swearing, but that's the name of the essay. In fact, if you do a search for it on Google, you will find it. A composition teacher says that you should do your first draft as if no one is ever going to see it. You should allow yourself to make as many mistakes as you want to. You should say whatever you want to say, in the full knowledge that nobody is ever going to see it, because it gets the info out of your system. Then you put it away and take the time to forget about it. You do not immediately begin to revise the essay right then, because if you do, you're going to leave a lot of stuff in, which is not a good thing, and here's why. When you do your primary revision on an essay, you have to remember that this is not your paper anymore. You instead are opening a paper that was written by somebody else, but they put your name on it, and it's not great work. It's work, in fact, that you were embarrassed by because, of course, it is an SFD, and you realize that you could do a lot better. And you can't do that if you're revising right out of the gate. Instead, you have to give yourself at least a couple of hours, or a few days, or maybe just a day, to forget what you've already written so that you can go back into it again. Because you're now treating this paper as if it's not your paper anymore, it's not the precious baby that you gave birth to 2 days ago, for instance, you can be brutal with it. You can take things out that now do not make sense. You can fill in the blanks, because if you try to do a primary revision right after you've done the first draft, and you've left a word out, or two, or five, then you're going to find that you won't see those blanks because your mind is filling in the blanks as you read. 2 days later, however, or even 2 hours later, depending on how long it takes you to forget that you drafted that paper, you'll be able to see the blanks, and you can try to fill them in. And you can get rid of the stupidity. And I'm not saying that anything in your paper will actually be stupid. I'm simply saying that there will be something in this draft that you will be so happy that nobody else saw, and you'll want to get rid of it. You'll also want to make the paper interesting, because if you're not interested reading this paper at this point, no one else is going to be. You should also avoid typical errors, such as there, and there, these, and theses. That's actually theses, which is plural for thesis, and it rhymes with feces, which is poo, and that's funny. There's also the difference between affect and effect. One is a verb, the other is a noun, where except when effect is a verb and affect is a noun, because that happens. There are some areas of the country where and were are spelled the same way because they sound the same to the people who are saying those words. And of course, to and to. And never use in today's society. Avoid it like the plague that it is. Well, that's not exactly the best wording for now, but you get the idea. Once you have done this primary revision, it's ready for other people to see it. So it's ready for peer evaluation. And you may be asking me or yourself, why should I let someone in here look at my paper? Why should anyone else in this class judge me? It's not a matter of judgment. And the answer to that question, by the way, is why not? Because individuals make different types of errors. Someone's paper may be full of common errors, but they know how to spell perfectly, whereas you may have trouble with spelling, but you don't know how to punctuate your way out of a wet paper bag. I think I just reversed those, but you get the idea. If you've got different people in different groups, they may have different errors, and they can spot each other's errors. In fact, you can do that anyway. You don't have to be an expert in grammar to do a good peer evaluation. You just have to be a good reader. You have to be somebody who is constructive, kind, and honest. You have to treat their draft exactly the way you would want your draft to be treated. You can't speed through it. You've got to read it carefully. And that's the only way you're going to see if it makes any sense or not. By the way, if anyone tells you this is perfect, don't change a thing, they're lying. And if you say that to somebody else, you're lying. A paper is never perfect. There's always something that can be improved. So even if you are put together in a peer evaluation group with somebody who you suspect is an A student, and by the way, they may not be, but if you think they might be an A student and you think you can't tell them anything, there's got to be something in that paper that you can turn to and say, this could be a little better. This is also the draft you should take to the Writing Center. Now, you may go to the Writing Center to get help with the drafting process. That doesn't mean you should go to the Writing Center and have them write the paper for you, because they won't, and nor should they. But if you've done your SFD, you're going to find that that first rough draft is generally too rough for someone else to see. So it's a good idea for you to take the draft that you have prepared for peer evaluation in for your Writing Center appointment. And step 12 is to revise, document, and turn it in. You should revise according to your peers' comments. You should document any sources at this point as necessary, and the reason why you wait until this step is because if you have two sources in a particular paragraph, and both of your peers have told you that paragraph makes no sense, and you get rid of it, what happens if that source is still on your works cited page? That's a problem, isn't it? Yes, it is. And also, you probably should proofread your own paper one more time. By this point, you've been through this paper at least 3 times, and you're bored sick of it. The way to denature that paper for yourself is to start at the back. Start on the last page, and going line by line, proofread it backward. Read from the last line, then the line before that, then the line before that. Not only will you be able to see connections between the lines, or to see if those connections don't exist, you'll also be able to spot errors a lot more easily because you're taking them line by line. This is in fact the way proofreaders do it. Whenever a proofreader proofreads a book, well, back in the old days anyway, they used to take a ruler and look at a line by itself, not in context of a paragraph. Also, do not trust spell check. Do not trust grammar check. Grammar check will tell you that something is right when it's wrong, and wrong when it's right. It cannot always be trusted. Also, do not trust spell check, because spell check may give you the word that it thinks you're spelling, but it may not be the word you intended. Also, spell check will not correct errors such as there, and there, and grammar check won't catch that either. And in fact, I had a very interesting experience once with a student who turned in a paper about diseases in Africa, and she argued that diseases in Africa were caused by the tsetse fly, which is spelled T-S-E-T-S-E. She apparently ran it through spell check and didn't proofread it again. And I got a paper saying that diseases in Africa were caused by the testes fly. And no, do not Google that, especially not as a Google image search, because I've done that already. It's terrifying. Anyway, this is why you should not trust spell check. You should not trust grammar check. You should revise it. You should document it with your sources. Turn it in to make sure it's not plagiarized. And start to pray, because at this point, it's out of your hands now, and I'm going to be grading it. So those are the 12 steps to drafting a paper. I hope this was helpful to you, and if you have any questions at all, please email me, text me, do whatever you need to do to get in touch with me, and we will talk to you soon. Take care.